The gate-kept minds of the hyper-mediated do not have to gatekeep your reality. The off-world stage observer takes the MSM- approach to interpreting the presented facts. This means subtracting the unverifiable aspects, the conjecture, and the hearsay. The off-world stage observer must shift the burden of proof to those propagating the extraordinary claims, reject the expectation that we automatically believe in every atrocity or threat scenario, question their claims, especially when they involve shocking claims and body counts, refuse to treat hearsay or the visual equivalent, see-say, as evidence. Re-examine past media claims, especially when these reinforce a contemporary psyop narrative. No news stories are sacrosanct or immune to good faith scrutiny and skeptical investigation. Who or what is the final arbiter of truth when it comes to what you accept? A media outlet, the consensus, a specific pundit, or is it your own critical thinking faculties? Stepping off the world stage is to remove its filter and replace it with your own logical framework that operates within a philosophical understanding of what media is. It can be likened to exiting a relationship with a liar. Filtering one's experiences through another's distorted version of events places one into an augmented reality, and one's worldview is slightly altered. This splinter reality is, in a microcosm, what the mass mind entered into with the filtration of media and religion. How does one avoid the trap of ignorance without having to pay attention to the overwhelming flood of conflicting narratives? If you're not interested in the daily deluge of infotainment drama, here is how you avoid the traps of accepting the default consensus view on everything without being plugged in. Look for the motives behind the stories. We ask what happened, not who did it, because the "it" has to be established as a factual event. Asking the question, "Did it happen at all?" is a good starting point. Are the questionable elements fakeable? To assume the premise established by the initial reporting is to build on a foundation of hearsay and see-say. The initial skepticism will save you the trouble of navigating the labyrinth of mainstream rabbit trails. Traditional conspiracy theorists tend to believe the mainstream is lying about the events reported on, but they don't dispute that the events happened or that people died. Conspiracy theorists ask, who is really responsible? Auto-hoaxers ask, did it even happen? World stage media. History is a set of lies agreed upon. Napoleon Bonaparte. Our reality-fluid world stage is a part magic show, part reality television, and part news reporting. The artificial reality construct and its metascripts are now laid bare for anyone to see. When you're at home watching Netflix, you're at the de facto state church. The entertainment is a side effect of the programming, of being surreptitiously indoctrinated into the church of state. What do we do with this? The answer is to see past the special effects and movie magic and independently determine the parameters of this reality. If we examine the past to understand how we got here, we run into conflicting accounts of what happened according to those with the power and influence to have a say in it. But what about the present news, before it becomes history? Would it not follow that the news media, too, is a set of narratives agreed upon? Look past the political divides shrilly accentuated by theatrics, and you may notice behind the myriad of small differences in opinion regarding life's everyday mundane questions, there is a strong consensus agreement about the big questions. The realm of possibility. The Overton window is the range of policies politically acceptable to the mainstream population at a given time. Right now, that window is wide open. In many ways, the television screen has become a literal Overton window. If it's on the screen, it gets instant access to the realm of possibility. On the world stage, reality is what liars can get away with. Therefore, the realm of possibility and the world stage are two different things, though they overlap physically. We are in a state of philosophical crisis because this apparent window has been so widely accepted as such when it's actually a filter. This filter acts as a stand-in for the individual's conscious deliberation. Instead of deciding if there is reason to believe, the filtered minds accept what is presented as believable. This eliminates the need to gather more information. This willful, ignorant position is threatened by suggestions their faith has been misplaced. You cannot honestly and in good faith record a light in the night sky and declare it's a possible alien UFO or mysterious government craft, or proclaim a noise heard in the woods is a Bigfoot, until you rule out a natural explanation with evidence. Hitchens's razor, an epistemological razor, and a general rule for rejecting certain knowledge claims states, "When what can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence." The inclusion of any supernatural phenomenon is not in the realm of possibility and therefore a non sequitur fallacy until it has been proven to exist first. Believing something without reason or in the face of contradiction requires a deliberate decision to not perceive it as an individual observer, but as a member of a hive taking perceptions second-hand. Hearsay and see-say, the visual equivalent of hearsay. Those who automatically believe what the world stage media says necessarily rely upon a middleman, a blue-check verified source, so they don't have to think. They don't seem to consider that allowing the media to invalidate their perceptions is to put their faith in a filtered version of how things are. Since most agree with what the filter provides, most don't resist it, or worse, attack the non-believer, the skeptic, and the doubter. The issue with this is the sheer subjectivity of the group mind. One decade the UFO believer is ridiculed. The next, they are held up as paragons of science. The auto-believer, the party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. George Orwell. Who thinks for you? Who or what is the final arbiter over what you accept, in your mind, as true? Have you outsourced your thinking when it comes to the reality as presented via the world stage media filters? How do so many people believe the mediated version by default? This is a problem of epistemology and the philosophical error inherent in masking one's mind with the mainstream media filter. What is your relationship to media? Do you believe in media? This is an important question. Do you believe in science? These are misleading questions rooted in a faulty understanding of what media and science are. The fact-finding processes of science or journalism are methods of determining what is real. Your critical thinking faculties do the same. However, when selectively outsourcing critical thinking, one is vulnerable to perceptual manipulation. This epistemological blind spot is what world stage media takes advantage of. You must choose to either remain in the default position of EA, world stage centric, and therefore misinformed with the latest consensus-based agreed-upon beliefs, or EB, off world stage centric, from where the self is the final arbiter of what is a faith-based belief and what constitutes knowledge. It is not denying reality to question consensus beliefs that are contradicted by what you know. Asserting hearsay as evidence or using appeals to authority is closer to reality denialism than rejecting questionable claims. The auto-hoaxer. An auto-hoaxer is one who requires evidence for claims made by pathologically lying media, especially when the claims are extraordinary. This requires shifting the burden of proof to the claim maker if the claim is not attended by facts. Have you ever called a bluff or demanded truth from a liar? To stand on the truth, you have to be willing to stand on truth against the lies that bond and bind the consensus. We all share the same external reality. Our differences are a matter of our frame of reference and its resultant interpretation. Repelling lies and deception is largely a matter of shifting the burden of proof to its rightful bearer. The auto-hoaxer is often left having to suspend judgment and is therefore not obligated to overreact to every news headline. The consensus is conditioned to rush to judgment with limited facts and a cognitive bias. There is a process required to know something, an internal process of cognition that requires factual information. Beliefs are rapidly assumed true on the basis of emotion, believability, and a myriad of potential logical fallacies. Knowledge may require additional research, fact-finding, and a thorough examination of available facts. This is not always conclusive immediately, and may explain why there is pressure to believe and resentment toward those conspiracy theorists who are questioning alleged facts. If you find this subject interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear the rest of the series, the IPSD program, a skeptic's guide to the theater of Psywar and IPS production. What is auto-hoaxing? Auto-hoaxing is the skeptical methodology for dissecting media-driven events, assuming these to be potentially fabricated until proven otherwise. It's not about denying reality, but challenging the burden of proof placed on the public by what media critics see as a deceptive psyop entertainment complex. Auto-hoaxing is a skeptical lens to see through scripted news events disguised as reality, emphasizing skepticism over blind acceptance. Applied skepticism. It's a systematic doubt applied to media claims, especially sensational ones like shootings or disasters, which media skeptics argue are fakeable and thus suspect. Unlike traditional conspiracy theories pinning events on specific actors and disagreeing upon which scapegoat is the correct one, auto-hoaxers view them as staged propaganda events, produced and performed by a unified government and media, not necessarily tied to specific culprits on one side of the political spectrum or the other. The label auto-hoaxer was a pejorative by conspiracy theorists to attack those suspicious of the media to the point of calling events fake. The thing is, auto-hoaxers were proven correct so many times, they could not be shamed into silence by conspiracy theorists alarmed at their insensitivity to the victims, alleged to be crisis actors. Auto-hoaxing is an active process or practice treating media events as hoaxes by default until factual evidence demonstrates otherwise. It's a mindset shift from auto-believing, accepting news at face value, to questioning everything, especially when evidence is second-hand or unverifiable. It serves as a defense against psychological operations, their default stance. If an event can be faked, via CGI, actors, or scripting, it's considered fake until proven real, flipping the burden of proof onto the media. Specifically, fake until proven real if certain criteria are met. Skeptics do not call everything fake. Our assertion is that fake or simulated events are presented to the world as real for propaganda purposes. Knowing this, the burden of proof question must be carefully considered. Even if I cannot immediately identify anything inauthentic about a piece of footage or a breaking headline, I'll still take time to look at the broader context and other footage and reportage before judging. Auto-hoaxing as media deconstruction. It involves breaking down news for signs of staging without assuming a who behind it. The analysis is not focused on seeking a culprit, but rather studying the event itself for indications of fabrication. The scapegoat narratives are predicated on the event's assumed authenticity. The skeptic must establish something happened first. This approach to consuming media leads to emotional detachment from the onslaught of headlines demanding our immediate attention. An auto-hoaxer is someone who adopts this philosophy, actively questioning media narratives rather than theorizing alternative culprits. They're not just skeptics but practitioners of a disciplined disbelief, often vilified as disaster trolls by mainstream pundits. How auto-hoaxers compare to conspiracy theorists? They view mainstream media as a monolithic entity, pushing myths along with facts. Working as a network, auto-hoaxers engage in live deconstructions of media-reported events, rejecting the predictable knee-jerk alt-media conspiracies. Unlike those speculating on who did it, e.g., Mossad or CIA, auto-hoaxers focus on what happened. To preemptively assume the event was real, along with whatever convenient scapegoat is provided, is to risk chasing a red herring, a false lead whose intended purpose is to lead one away from considering the event was fake. Conspiracy theorists habitually reject the mainstream version of events, while automatically adopting the popular alternative takes. Their stances are more reflexive rather than skeptical. Conspiracy theorists are quick to disbelieve the mainstream and quick to believe the alternative. Auto-hoaxers suspend judgment and pause before believing and disbelieving. Believer versus knower, the auto-hoaxer's distinction, the skeptic auto-hoaxer. An auto-hoaxer requires evidence for claims made by a pathologically lying media, especially when those claims are extraordinary. This means investigating, fact-finding, and examining events critically. Often, conclusions cannot be reached immediately, so the auto-hoaxer must suspend judgment and resist overreacting to televised news, the non-skeptic auto-believer. An auto-believer assumes what is televised is true. They believe hoaxes or fake news would be exposed by reporters, unaware that in the case of psychological operations, journalists can be part of the production itself. They imagine reporters as passive observers rather than active participants in staging events. Skilled liars don't lie constantly, but strategically, and only to those who already trust them. A psyop is simply a lie presented as reality. A staged play reinforced by scripted statements to prop up a false narrative. The media is a skilled liar. It presents reality faithfully enough that there's a built-in assumption that it presents a window to the world, rather than a distorting filter. Auto-believers misunderstand the nature of mainstream media, its centralization, its use of publicity stunts, perception management, and worldview warfare disguised as entertainment. They trust their news sources, assuming a vetting process filters out fakery. This imagined safeguard replaces critical thinking, and this outsourcing of the intellectual work leaves them vulnerable to manipulation. With so many competing networks and too much information to process, most people outsource their intelligence gathering. The result is a gap between known facts and accepted beliefs. Media consumers have been transformed into members of a faith-based belief system. While political opinions differ, they still operate within the same basic, media-defined reality. Belief systems are acquired through social contagion, tradition, ideology, peer pressure, or passive acceptance of the default narrative, rather than direct knowledge. Worse, seeking knowledge rather than accepting beliefs is stigmatized, with dissenters labeled conspiracy theorists or purveyors of misinformation. Conspiracy theorists, doing their own research, have the right intentions. Their error is in assuming the alternative answers are any more reliable than the mainstream ones. If you find this subject interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear the rest of the series, the IPSD program, a skeptic's guide to the theater of Psywar and IPS production. None dare call it hoax. The prevailing wisdom among conspiracy theorists a few years ago was, don't automatically call it a hoax, and think of the victims and their families. Those who jumped the gun can call fake news out, as such were derisively called auto-hoaxers. As it turned out, they were right all along. They rejected the burden of proof. By withholding agreement, they were inoculated against the worst effects of personal involvement in emotionally charged propaganda. Employing skepticism in today's hyper-mediated world is only reasonable. What was originally a pejorative term became a description for media skeptics who have progressed beyond alternative media explanations for staged events. Auto-hoaxology is the cutting fringe of alternative thought, and it's ironic that conspiracy theorists touting red pills attempted to silence the first wave of auto-hoaxers. Fake until proven real. All MSM extraordinary claims must be met with requests for evidence. This places the burden of proof back to the maker of the claim. The media puts it on you to ignore the lack of evidence, to just believe uncritically. This is because they wish MSM viewers to be believers, not knowers. Believers exist in a world of subjectivity. Knowers have an objective understanding of the world. When people accuse us of calling all news fake, the counter should be to accuse them of believing all news is real. In this case, the skeptics have a point, the anti-skeptics do not. But because we know the media is a liar, they have the capability of lying, and they have a predilection for using psychological operations and special effects to augment their reportage. We can't give them blind faith and trust. The auto-hoaxer corrects the burden of proof demands and refuses to believe or react to it as though it is true until the evidence supports reacting. Unless evidence supports the extraordinary claims, it must be treated as fake if it is fakeable until or proven real. The low information believer has a low bar. The informed disbeliever maintains reasonable standards. This fake until proven real becomes increasingly necessary as realistic generative AI becomes part of our everyday experience. Simulated, not stimulated. Conspiracy theorists believe the government is causing things and the media reports on them, for example, school shootings. They call these false flags. This implies real events stimulated by a hidden hand. The trouble with this explanation is it assumes the media itself is merely reporting real events and not involved in the fabrications. This both exonerates the media and conceals their actual role as worldview fabricators rather than news reporters. Viewpoints that contradict mainstream lies are cancelled or ignored, while false flag conspiracy theories get promoted via negative coverage. The most important distinction between the MSM, MSM+, and MSM- points of view is that the MSM- view includes excluded information. For instance, the inclusion of influence operations, covert propaganda messaging in mainstream entertainment, media fakery, entirely reframes each event. However, the fact that simulated events, PSYOPs, are routinely staged is not part of the MSM perspective. So in addition to subtracting the unverifiable, there is the addition of supplementary verifiable information. The auto-hoaxer is not a denier of any facts. Rejecting bad or incomplete information is not denialism. Believing in fake events despite lack of good information is reality augmentation, also known as lying. The believer versus knower distinction is the core of the auto-hoaxer concept. Here are a few key points I'd like to clarify in this regard. Auto-hoaxer, one who requires evidence for claims made by pathological lying media, especially when the claims are extraordinary. This requires investigation, fact-finding, and thorough examination. This is not always conclusive immediately, and therefore, the auto-hoaxer is often left having to suspend judgment and overreactions to televised news. This stance is in contrast to the auto-believer, one who assumes what is televised to be true. Their assumption is that the fake news or hoaxes would be exposed by the reporters or journalists. Their error stems from both blind conformity and the false premise that reporters aren't part of the production process. So they see reporters as bystanders with cameras, watching a scene unfold, rather than as a reality television production crew, which is what they essentially are. I apply the fakeability test to likely or suspected fake news. This is simply asking the question such as, can this or that event be faked? Is it fakeable? And if so, on what scale? Without this test, which is only a series of questions, an auto-believer would not be able to claim to know absolutely if something is true. If someone claims that a news event has to be real because they saw a tweet about it, they must at least be able to admit whether such a thing is possible to fake. What I find is that true believers don't know how much fakery is even possible, much less in common use. The people who automatically believe the news really do catch mind viruses. The censors in high places want the public to fear memes because one might catch whatever bad ideas contained therein. It seems the ideal citizen of the future will lack the ability to deliberately reject ideas and will be passive recipients of programming and instructions. I'm beginning to suspect this is where we are headed. A new human is emerging, one totally augmented with a digital world that has been utterly censored and merged with the state's chosen operating system. This future requires that we lose the ability to know real from fake. The world stage is subjective and arbitrary, and its existence rests more upon narratives than facts. Discerning fake from real is now outsourced to trusted news agencies, all of which operate from within the closed informational system of the world stage. We are going deeper into the simulation. The metaverse is conquering the meatverse. Masked minds, quarantined thoughts. We accept the reality of the world with which we are presented. It's as simple as that. Christoph, Truman's mind control programmer. The media-manufactured worldview as a model of reality has enabled the power elite to create a hive mind. The majority are misled by design with media literalism. They exist in ignorance of how their big picture has been formed. They carry the mass media's burden of proof, not recognizing this as the blind spot it is. The collaboration between government, media, entertainment, military, law enforcement, religion, and every other trusted institution is too vast to be viewed from within this Truman Show-like enclosure. Most lack the perspective to deconstruct the big deceptions. The existence of a psychological war isn't immediately apparent to the quarantined minds of the mass media consumers. Before 2012, nobody outside of the actual Psywar operatives knew what a crisis actor was. You had to be an insider to have a clue. We have been under a mental quarantine this entire time. The peeks we get behind the curtain are our only glimpses into somewhere outside of the established worldview. The perspective that we are being lied to on a deep level that there are insiders and outsiders is a major step forward in appreciating just what the world stage is. To see the system in its entirety, one must step outside of it. To question the system's motives or purpose is to entertain a hypothetical situation in which one might have been deceived. We are in a closed system, and most choose to remain mentally masked and quarantined against ideas that invalidate its claims. If you find this subject interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear the rest of the series, the IPSD program, a skeptic's guide to the theatre of Psywar and IPS production. Alternative Cave, Alternative Shadows. From the blue-pilled dream world of Normieville to the nightmarish fringe of the darkest conspiracies, we are all living in an augmented reality. The normie dream is tranquil compared to the nightmare the red-pilled awaken to. Red and blue pills might as well come from the same pharmaceutical factory. The whole idea of taking a pill seems very pharmaceutical-coded. It's almost as though we live in a vast mental asylum and the more unruly minds are prescribed harsher propaganda. The Q movement didn't wake from the blue pill trance into reality. It simply adopted an alternative worldview. But alternative doesn't necessarily mean truthful. Even when alternative voices are sincere, their honesty ends if they continue to build on the mainstream's foundation of lies. Take 9/11 truthers, for example. They debated how the attacks were done and who did them, but rarely questioned whether the attacks happened at all. The idea that such an event could be entirely staged was outside the frame of reference for both mainstream and alternative media at the time. Mass media never includes true non-believers in its narratives. It may mock or attack alternative explanations, but only if they still accept the core claim. You can say reptilian space aliens did 9/11 and get laughed at in mainstream interviews and branded a conspiracy kook, but say it was a decades-in-the-making psychological operation, and you'll be excluded from the discussion entirely. Why? Because it comes down to a worldview monopoly. This monolithic psychological containment system for all humanity is a closed system, and nothing outside of its paradigm is acknowledged. In Westworld, the characters trapped in the simulation say, "It doesn't look like anything to me," when confronted with information that triggers their cognitive dissonance. This prevents them from processing reality outside their programmed loop. Captive and passive audience in a closed system. The media manages a status quo, and its defense mechanisms include pre-packaged conspiracy narratives that guardrail the mainstream narratives. It is important to understand what media is and how centralized its storytelling is. Publicity stunts, perception management, psychological operations, and worldview warfare being waged under the guise of news and entertainment leaves us at the mercy of trusted pundits. By necessity, most working people must outsource to some degree their news aggregation. The overload makes it impossible to reject every claim not substantiated by evidence. This shifts us from active to passive news consumers. Auto-hoaxing is active. Auto-believing is passive. Most people passively accept the news they didn't watch as true. After all, if it was fake, someone would have told them, or so they ignorantly assume. The ideal citizen lacks the ability to deliberately reject ideas and is a passive recipient of programming and instructions. The power elite is engineering a new human, totally augmented with a digital world that has been utterly censored and merged with the state's approved operating system. Healthy agnosticism is certainly warranted in today's immersive illusion. You must step outside of the consensus frame of reference to see the consensus as such. If you don't consider the possibility that you're wrong, you may never know. Hubris and ego keep many locked in their point of view. Contradictions always result in cognitive dissonance, upset expectations, and painful emotions. When reality and beliefs clash, there is dissonance and disharmony. The pain of being wrong becomes an incentive to avoid confronting contradictions. We see this at the individual level and at the level of political parties and religions. The auto-believers are akin to religious fundamentalists. Just as religious fundamentalism becomes volatile and dangerous, so too does the unthinking and blind acceptance of government propaganda make the true believers dangerous and extreme. They are dangerous simply by their influence. Auto-believers largely outnumber auto-hoaxers. The dominant paradigm, the consensus agreement, exists in the minds of the believers. The perspective of the non-believers is not included within the closed informational system of the world stage. The meta-conspiracy. All the separate state-approved conspiracy theories, red pills, trutherism, QAnon, are not only fake, but are all part of a larger, unified psychological war. This is the real conspiracy. The metascript is the story within which all the other stories take place, the place where entertainment fiction and pseudo-news fiction merge. This would include the eschatological script inherent in the climate change narrative, a secular doomsday flood myth. Those who believe we're following a path to civilizational destruction in 10 years because of our eco-sins are following a metascript, a propaganda narrative told across many platforms, fictional and non-fictional over time. Every holy book contains a metascript. Religions are competing worldviews, fighting over the interpretation of reality. Media, not traditional religion, is now the opiate of the masses. The mainstream mediated worldview is tantamount to a new Bible. One way to conceptualize this is Old Testament, New Testament, and today we have a News Testament. Media, as a world-state church, has supplanted religion in its worldview-shaping influence. It's no different than a holy book in the authority it exerts over the mind of its believers. By default, all news remains within the established parameters of the world stage, the model within which all of the fictional augmentations to our worldview are performed. Like a religion, mass media supplies us with our contemporary myths. Against the backdrop of real news, real culture, and real happenings, there is the metascript, a pre-scripted history that day-to-day happenings are conformed to. The entertainment media consistently foreshadows and prepares the public for future psyops. Additionally, it supplies real-time, concurrent psyop reinforcement content. This is beyond mere predictive programming and reveals a synchronization between parallel propaganda streams, not as anomalous, but as systemic. Planted hints demonstrate that the psychological operations are written into the metascript. This explains the seemingly eerie foreshadowing often described as predictive. Entertainment and news reporting follow the same metascript on parallel propaganda streams. Both news and entertainment media serve a singular purpose, maintaining the status quo within the world stage, our de facto one-world religion. The Psywar is a permanent fixture, the primary instrument of government itself. The war is not meant to be won, it is meant to be continuous. On Perpetual War from George Orwell's 1984. If you find this subject interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear the rest of the series, the IPSD program, a skeptic's guide to the theater of Psywar and IPS production. The knowledge gap. Consider the latest terrorist attack or mass shooting. Do you have any direct knowledge beyond what you saw on a screen? If not, can you truly claim to know it happened? The assumption that a screen is a window to reality is the fundamental flaw in the thinking of every auto-believer. Believers don't doubt the reality of the event. They simply argue over the cause. The left blames gun culture. The right blames antidepressants. Both have their scapegoats, yet neither questions whether the event itself occurred. Without direct knowledge, nobody can honestly claim to be a knower. Watching the news will not lead to an informed public. All mass media builds upon previously canonized misinformation and operates within the worldview built upon this edifice. Mass mediation ensures society adheres to the same script, that we all exist in the same fictional universe. Non-skeptics comfortably believe the version of events they are shown without concern about gaps in their direct knowledge of what they accept as true. This blind spot is the loophole through which every influence operation and psyop gets an automatic pass. Believers versus believers. Believers, having outsourced their need to know, live in a world of incomplete or false explanations. They tend to react emotionally when those explanations are challenged because they inconveniently lack any information to replace them. Why would they lie, they naively ask. When one believes in the establishment's lies, denialism is the default posture toward challenges to the authority of their source. Most would rather deny they have a wrong answer than admit to having been tricked. As with small cults, large groups will exhibit confidence in retaining their position and will simply reject the new information. Ideas that can break down the integrity of a group are like mind viruses that attack the immune system of the superorganism. When the basis for its hive mind is undermined, it reacts defensively. They will shoot the messenger for the same reason an unvaccinated person will be unwelcome at a quarantined household. Every political faction, news corporation, religious denomination, or cult has the truth from its own perspective. The individual whose views conflict with the group must be converted or marginalized, silenced, and exiled. Until such individuals are quarantined and their harmful ideas are removed, the group's existence is threatened. Belief systems versus operating systems. The instant the screen became universally recognized as an authority, the world went into a shared consensus worldview. After all, nothing could be more objective than a camera recording reality, right? No. But that is the built-in assumption. There is a sense that the screen is a window, a perspective, especially so when it comes to new reporters. A reporter goes to a scene, talks to witnesses, records footage, and then assembles a story out of the gathered facts. Again, this process is only as biased as the news agency. Should we automatically be suspicious of all news reporting agencies? Yes. This doesn't mean the reporters are in on a conspiracy, but they will carry the worldview shared by their network. Worldview is also a point of view, and therefore you cannot consider any news reportage that comes from a fallacious worldview to be objective. You merely have to account for their perceptual bias, unconscious or not. Intentions should not be a consideration. Even the most well-intentioned mainstream journalist will report from atop an edifice of lies. To call something fake with no knowledge of how or why is the exact philosophical error made by those that consider everything real with no knowledge of how or why. What typifies most news consumers is the auto-belief. Auto-belief and auto-disbelief are both errors in judgment that arise from making a choice to believe or not without awaiting further information. The mass media rushes news consumers to judgment, often aided by emotional appeals, because once a believer accepts a belief, they will fight to defend it. Auto-hoaxology could be considered an operating system rather than a belief system, because unlike belief systems, in which one is agreeing with a group who share the beliefs, it is a rejection of unvetted belief through a methodological approach to processing media which rejects the screen at face value as anything other than a claim that must be appropriately processed. To automatically believe without processing those beliefs through a logical framework is to acquire a worldview on faith. Faith, in a traditional religious context, might be a virtue. Faith in media requires a shameful level of self-gaslighting and a total lack of situational awareness. They don't want individuals to know how to see through the fake news. They want you to believe what one side or the other side says without questioning the essential reality. The media elite want believers versus believers controlled from the top, not bottom-up grassroots knowers attempting to independently discern the truth independent of pre-packaged opinion clusters. For example, a Las Vegas news agency reported a story about a UFO sighting and eyewitness descriptions of 8-foot-tall creatures in their backyard. Did it happen? We don't have enough information to know. All we know is they reported an account of what someone said. There is no basis for assuming it to be true, nor evidence of aliens. Had the sighting been of a unicorn with a leprechaun on its back, they would have ignored the story without question. But why? What makes a unicorn story less valid than an alien one? Worldview, that's what. We live in a shared consensus view in which space aliens are considered within the realm of possibility, and unicorns are designated fiction. When it comes to mass media, their reporting all comes from the shared perspective that aliens might be real. Earth is heating up, although we debate the cause. Schools are being shot up regularly by AR-15 toting mentally ill racists, and terrorists have been known to take down buildings with airplanes. The consensus worldview is the one we are educated into and see televised, streamed, broadcast, shared, and propagated via influencers. It is the internalized concept of the world we all share. Those who reject or question it are derided, attacked, and censored. The mass-mediated belief system reflects the dominant worldview and perspective from which the majority of humanity are coming from. It's tantamount to a religion, although the shared view actually encompasses all religions, insofar as their world is contained within. I refer to the mass-mediated worldview as a religion because it qualifies as a belief system, on par with any religious paradigm to the extent that it's a closed belief system. By closed, I mean internally vetted to exclude outside perspectives. Individuals that take radically different views are marginalized, censored, and excluded, outside of being targeted for character assassination and made examples of. Independent media is only independent if it operates from an alternative perspective that doesn't exclude that which the mainstream media excludes. The consensus view is a product of omissions as much as overt lies. But independent doesn't mean objective or fact-based. If they are sharing the consensus view, they cannot qualify as objectively reporting, but rather of proffering an alternative belief system. Independent or alternative media that exist within the mainstream media's closed ecosystem can only advance more subjective belief systems, however many times spun or regurgitated. The only alternative to belief systems that come second hard and are as such pre-filtered is to adopt an operating system when it comes to our hypermediated environment and the biased worldview it upholds. Assuming one chooses not to consciously support the power elite's mass mind control operation in progress, one must step outside of the theater of Psywar. This means recognizing the belief systems as such and proceeding to base one's worldview on what can be known. Acquiring a knowledge-based worldview is primarily a matter of properly categorizing information and separating knowledge from beliefs. Moreover, one must be capable of existing as a non-believer in a world of believers, understanding but not sharing their fears. The auto-hoaxer preemptively considers something could possibly be a psyop a little more carefully before accepting it at face value. It doesn't mean automatically calling everything fake. It means withholding assent until claims can be verified. If you find this subject interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear the rest of the series, the IPSD program, a skeptic's guide to the theater of Psywar and IPS production.